Stephen Galbraith, and I'm the chair. And this is a session with 5 papers on cryptanalysis and 1 paper on constructions. And I'm going to first start off by sharing this beautiful, I'm being reminded of my trips to Japan, and this is my beautiful sake cup from PKC 2013, which was in Japan. And it still smells delicious, but I'm not going to drink any sake because it's only 1:20 in the afternoon for me. So anyway, kanpai. All right, so good morning, good night, good day to everybody, and we'll start with Jan Peter. Do you want to share your slides?
Yeah, let's go.
And if anyone's got questions, you can put them in the Zulip or in the chat.
So are my slides visible?
Yes, you can start.
So with that obligatory start, so thanks for the introduction. And so let's talk about decryption failure attacks. So first question, what are decryption failure attacks? Imagine that we have a public key encryption scheme. So Alice sends a public key to Bob, Bob sends a ciphertext to Alice. And imagine that this public key encryption scheme has a certain decryption failure probability. So this means that even if we send a perfectly valid ciphertext, there is a certain probability that it cannot be decrypted correctly. Then we can do decryption failure attacks. And so in these decryption failure attacks, what happens is that an attacker will send in valid ciphertext, so correct ciphertext, but this attacker will try to trigger decryption failures. So it will try to find ciphertexts that are not decryptable by Alice. And if the adversary finds such a ciphertext, he or she will learn something about the secret key of Alice and can therefore try to recover the secret key. So in my online talk, in the longer talk, I gave a longer introduction to decryption failures. So if you're interested in decryption failures, please have a look at this at the online talk, or take a look at our paper, of course, or these papers that give a nice introduction to the field, I think. So what we did in our paper was look at 2 things. The first one is to look at constrained attacks, practical attacks, and then secondly, to look at what these attacks actually mean for schemes like Saber and Kyber, so real world schemes. So let's first look at constrained attacks. And what do I mean with this? So previous attacks were not always practical. So some of these attacks you would need to do 2 to the 128 ciphertext queries, for example. And that would be directed at one server or one IoT node. And this is more like a denial of service attack than it is to a key retrieving attack. So one thing that was proposed previously is to do multi-target attacks. So you spread your queries over multiple targets, and you retrieve the key of one of these targets, of one random target. So for example, you have a maximum of 2 to 64 queries for one specific target, but you target 2 to 64 targets, and you want to break one target as random. So in our paper, we introduced a method, a leveled multi-target attack, that in some cases actually improves on the previous attacks by doing more pre-processing work, more work in the first stage, and then reduce the work in the second stage. So the second thing that we looked at was improving the cost estimation. So the theory of decryption failures is in essence rather simple, but if you want to then cost this, so if you want to know what the cost is of these attacks, these calculations are really expensive, really hard to do, and you need to do approximations, simplifications. And so in our paper, we revisited some of these approximations, some of these simplifications. So we looked at, for example, weak keys, worse than expected angle. We took into account a lot more to try to get a better estimation of the cost of these attacks. Also, we looked specifically at Kyber and Saber. So in our previous work, in our Eurocrypt work, we actually worked on a simplified scheme, Katana. We call it Katana here. And we made some simplifications to make it easier to do this cost estimation. And in this work, we look at models that can also obtain estimates for Saber and Kyber. As you can see in these figures, there's actually a big difference. So the blue curve is what you would have with this simplified model from previous papers, and the orange model is a new model. And you can see that there's really like a 20 or 30 bit difference between the models. And the old model is actually really not accurate for Sabre and Kyber, for practical schemes. So it was correct for this Katana simplified scheme, but not correct for Sabre and Kyber, and we corrected that in our paper. So we have a lot of numbers in the results. If you want to understand these numbers, understand this table, I would recommend you to read the paper, especially in the last part. We really try to explain the attacks in detail, or the effects of the attacks in detail. But as a conclusion, if you want to do an estimation of a scheme, if you want to do failure boosting attack cost estimations, please use our newest code. It's more accurate. It's better code, so you can find it here. And then secondly, what is the impact on the schemes? So if we look at single target attack, like classical attack, where you want to target one node, then clearly these attacks are not possible on any of the NIST submissions. If you do these multi-target attacks, theoretically, in very extreme cases where you're very relaxed on the conditions, you can have a small security reduction. But in practice, these attacks are really not efficient. You need like very relaxed security constraints. So in practice, these attacks are not better than direct lattice attacks on the lattice. So interesting future work. Well, we have this framework. We did it for Sabre and Kyber. What happens if we try to apply it to Frodo? What happens if we try to apply it to schemes with error correcting codes, or maybe code-based crypto? And also from the other side, what happens if we try to improve the security bound? So not from an attack side, but from the security side. Can we improve our security proofs? And with that, I'm open to all questions.
Thanks very much, Jan-Pieter, for your talk. So if anyone's got questions, they can raise hand or put them in the chat or the Zulip. There was a question in the chat quite a while ago about, it says, I guess the situation is the same as the in CCA case. I'm not exactly sure what is the question, but I mean, this work is very much in the setting of where there's some kind of Fujisaki Okamoto being used, right? You're really talking about attacks in the setting where there's already some kind of protection against adaptive attacks.
Yes. So if you don't have protection against active attacks like chosen ciphertext attacks, then you would never do this because there's much easier attacks out there. That's correct.
Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question from Kitagawa. The question, if no one else has a question, I was curious about one thing. I mean, I've looked at some of your papers before, and if I understand the failure boosting, the kind of philosophy of failure boosting is that once you get one choice of matrix that has a high probability of causing a failure, you try and generate more examples that are kind of pointing in the same direction, or you're sort of using that information about the existing failure to create further failures. This is in the pre-computation. And I was wondering if you've thought about what that actually means for the key recovery later on, because it wasn't clear to me for the actual key recovery. Once you have a lot of failures, you then want to try and learn something about the secret, right? And could there be an issue there if the failures were all somehow too correlated? Would you really be able to get enough information to learn the whole secret?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So indeed, and so this is something that we try to take away a bit in this work, is indeed if you start to do failure boosting, so you are going to find information that you already have, kind of. So you'll find more redundant information than if you don't. So we think, and this is a previous paper in our previous paper together with Melissa Rossi and Fernando Verdia, we did some experiments, and we think that this is not too much of a problem for the attack. But we never tried it like completely or tested this, because it's really hard to actually create a scenario where you can test this. So it's an interesting question, I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, that's about the time, I think. So unless there's anything urgent, that I've missed anything, I don't see anything else. So thank you again, Jan-Peter, for the virtual applause. Now, I'm not sure if we have the next speaker. Is this on here? I don't see anything in the call that looks like it could be him. So I propose in that case, we move ahead to the third talk. This means that this will in fact be a session on cryptanalysis. So I think Pierrick, do you want to set up? Great.
So hello everyone. Can everyone see my slides?
Yep, that's good. It's not quite the full screen. Do you want to put it in presentation mode?
Okay. Hope this works better this way.
It's the same, but I think it's okay.
Okay. That's unfortunate. Okay. Well, okay. But do you see it clearly?
I think it's good enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So please begin.
So thank you, everybody. Today I will talk about the security analysis of oriented supersingular isogeny Diffie-Hellman due to Leonardo Collo and David Kohel. This protocol is based on cryptographic group actions. So let's briefly recall what it is. To be cryptographic group action needs to be abelian, transitive, and faithful, but also easy to compute and one way for security reasons. Meaning that if you have X and Y that you know on the group action space and a group element relating them that is unknown, G, then G is hard to find. So with this, we can perform a Diffie-Hellman key exchange by fixing a public parameter S0 in the space, and then Alice and Bob will select secret group elements.
Sorry, do you, we're still seeing the title slide. So are you moving through the slides now?
Yes.
Well, okay, we're only seeing the title.
Well, I'm sorry. So I will.
I think you should share your desktop and not only as a PDF viewer.
So I'm sharing my desktop and not my PDF. Okay. So that was not what I intended to do. Well. Do you see a new slide now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for those technical problems. So do I move on? Are you seeing changes?
Yes, it's good now.
Okay, perfect. So as I said, we have a cryptographic group action. With this, we perform a Diffie-Hellman key exchange by fixing a public space element, and Alice and Bob can choose separate secret group elements, perform a group action on this public element, exchange the data they computed, and act with their secret on the exchange data to recover the shared secret key GHX0. This will work because the group is abelian and will be secure because the group action is one way. So how does it work for OSIDE? For OSIDE, we act with the ideal class group of a quadratic imaginary order. The space will be the space of O-oriented supersingular elliptic curves, and the group action will be given by a correspondence between ideal classes and isogenies between those oriented elliptic curves. Concretely, to compute the group action, we work in the L isogeny graph, which has the structure of a volcano. Each level of the volcano is given by an orientation of an order. appearing here, and meaning that every level is actually a space for an ideal class group action. The crater, for instance, is oriented by the maximal order, and at level n, we are oriented by the order of conductor L to the n. And as we go deeper in the graph, the level size grows exponentially. So we need to just go deep enough to ensure security of the protocol. Let's say that we act at level n, and we want to compute the group action of an ideal A on En. Then we use the structure of the graph to represent En as a descending L isogeny chain, and act with A on every level going down the graph. And the result will be another descending L isogeny chain, whose ending element is the group action that we wanted to compute in the first place. But this works only with ideals of short norms. These are computation that I presented. So we fix a bunch of them that generate the ideal class group, and we act by product of them. In the protocol, then it would be natural just to use this bunch of ideals, of course, and descending L isogeny chains, and Alice and Bob would exchange such chains, so it would be the normal Diffie-Hellman protocol. But the problem is that this approach is insecure because let's say that we study Alice exchange, the attacker knows the public chain and the chain Alice sent to Bob, then he would be able to recover the secret ideal class relating those two chains by simply going down the graph level by level to recover the ideal class level by level until recovering the ideal class in the ideal class group of On. So an attacker will be able to break such a protocol. So the trick introduced by Colo and Kohel is not to use, not to exchange the whole chains, but instead only vertical information given by the group action of the QJ, the generators that we have on the ending element of the chains. But this is not enough to make OSIDE secure, actually, because with those horizontal chains, we are able to recover the whole descending L isogeny chain. Why? Because this could be leveraged to find a cycle in the level n of the graph. And this cycle could be used to recover the element of level n-1 in the chain. Then we could just push the information that we have at level n to level n-1 to recover again a cycle, go to level n-2, and like this recover the whole chain. The question is now, how can we find such a cycle? We just have to compute the group action by principal ideal, because this will give an endomorphism, which is actually a cycle. And to be simple to compute, this group action by a principal ideal would need to be in the right form, meaning a product of the QJ with small exponents. So what we do to find such an ideal is that we look for short vectors in the relation lattice of the ideal class group. And so our attack is, of course, exponential because we have a lattice reduction to perform, but it's efficient enough to break Colo and Kohel's parameters. And the countermeasures existing to our attack slow the protocol excessively, so make it impractical, or hamper its functionality because we no longer have a cryptography group action. Thank you for your attention. Now I'm ready for your questions.
Thanks, Pierrick. The time is going quite quickly, though I'm aware that we kind of have potentially 10 minutes spare. Anyway, I think it's a cool paper, and it's really nice to see a lattice attack on a isogeny. It's like almost like a pure lattice attack against an isogeny cryptosystem. So I like it. Any questions at all from anybody?
So may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you for nice classical attack, but if you compare quantum sub-exponential attack for cryptographic group action, so you have some comment for the comparison with your attack, classical attack?
Yes, our approach is classical. You mean, do we have a comparison with quantum attacks? Or I did not.
Yeah. So some if compare with such sub-exponential attack, how trade-off for size parameter, you have some comment?
We did not actually study quantum attacks like hidden subgroups or those kind of attacks. But of course, we are aware that we could have interesting complexity properties because we would have sub-exponential complexity. Well, of course, these attacks are not practical because we could not implement them since we do not have a quantum computer, and we wanted an implementation. But what is interesting is that related to our countermeasure, one of them actually prevents those kind of attack, and of course our attack. Meaning that if we make the key space very small, it's mentioned in our paper compared to the ideal class group, then we don't have short vectors, so we cannot perform our attack. But we also do not cover the whole ideal class group, so we cannot perform group attacks like hidden subgroup. So there are, of course, parallels between those, but we did not do very rigorously the comparison with the security parameters.
Okay,
it's for works actually.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was muted. Pierrick, can you stop sharing so we can move on to the next talk? Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks for your talk. It was a very nice paper. All right, Charlotte, do you want to get set up?
Yes. Okay, let me share my video on the screen. Can you see it now?
Yep, that's great. So yeah, please start.
Okay, so hi everyone. This is a joint work with Pierre Carpin with subject time-memory trade-offs for large weight syndrome decoding in ternary codes. So, okay. So here we consider an instance of the fixed weight syndrome decoding problem. This takes as input a parity check matrix of a certain code, where n is the code length and k the dimension. Then we have S the syndrome and W the weight. The aim is to solve HE equals S, and the solution must have a Hamming weight equal to W. We'll restrict ourselves to a setting where the parity check matrix and the syndrome are assumed to be both sampled uniformly at random. Also, the code rate and relative weight are fixed to these values, and in particular, we are in a large weight regime. Also, here we are far from the Gilbert-Varshamov bound, so that the total number of expected solutions here is exponential in the code length. Yet the weight is large enough so that this problem is believed to be hard. This is quite an unusual problem, and in fact here our main motivation is the wave signature scheme introduced by Debray-Alazar et al., where one of its security requirements is the hardness of the syndrome decoding problem presented a slide ago. In fact, Bricout et al. Studied in detail the large weight ternary syndrome decoding problem. They proposed new parameters for this signature scheme that we are going to use in this work. I'll go back later on the technique that they used, but the best instance to solve the large weight syndrome decoding problem underlying wave signature scheme has the following asymptotic cost. And this cost is in time and in memory. And in this work, we propose to investigate the possible trade-off for this problem. To do that, we started the same way as Bricout et al. That is, we use the PG plus SS framework. It's a framework that was formalized by them, and this is a modular description of most ISD-based algorithms. So here on the left-hand side, we have the original syndrome decoding problem, and on the right-hand side, this is the sub-problem derived thanks to this framework. So this is a sub-syndrome decoding problem where we require many solutions. So in fact, this is a sub-problem because H2 is a submatrix of H after having done a partial Gaussian elimination. In our case, we have some freedom on the size of the submatrix, and in our case, it will provide us trade-offs. Noteworthy is that here, we want only a fraction of the solutions to the sub-problem. So as pointed out by Bricout et al., because the solutions here are required to be full weight, the derived sub-problem in fact reduces to the 0-1 subset sum problem. Concretely, it means that we can use generalized birthday algorithms solving the following problem, where we have as input our list, and the aim is to find one element in each list such that the sum gives the null vector. So the generalized birthday algorithms are doing a sort of smart exhaustive search, and one of their attractive features is that they are able to provide solutions at a constant amortized cost. However, some of these algorithms are designed to exhaustively solve the generalized birthday problem, and some of them are going to return much more solutions than the desired amount, and it yields to suboptimal instances. In such case, we'd say that the algorithm has a coarse granularity. So now this is the algorithms from the literature that we considered in this work. The dissection from Diner et al. And the K-tree from Wagner can be seen as generalizations of the meet-in-the-middle algorithm. In particular, Bricout et al. Used the K-tree combined with the representation technique, and it gave them the asymptotic cost presented a few slides ago. Also, it's possible to hybrid the K-tree and the dissection, and it gives us the dissection in tree, and it was introduced by Diner. So the summary is that the dissection is much more memory efficient than the K-tree. However, for large memory, the dissection has a coarse granularity. So we tried to make the dissection return as few solutions as possible, but despite this tweak, the K-tree was still performing better. However, tweaking the granularity for the dissection in tree was quite successful, and it gave us instances which were always better than or equivalent to the dissection and the K-tree. So all of these algorithms provided us a near continuous time memory trade-off curve, and this table summarizes some of its points, unless the first line, which is from Bricout et al.'s work. On this table, we included the product time memory, which can be useful to compare the different trade-offs, and we can see that it decreases along with the memory consumption. So for our instances, these are all dissection in tree, and the first number is the number of levels used in the tree, and the second one is the dissection used. And we can see that when the memory consumption decreases, in fact, the granularity of the dissection becomes less a problem, and we can consider larger dissections. So that's it for this presentation, and thank you for your attention. Do you have any question?
Thank you very much for your talk. All right, have we got any questions from the audience in the Zulip or the chat, or anyone wants to?
Yes, I would have a question.
Yep.
Thank you for the talk, Charlotte. I was wondering, so the best algorithm is based on the combination of the K-tree algorithm and representation technique. Did you study if it's possible to improve your trade-offs time-wise by considering the representation technique?
No, in this work, we didn't focus on the representation technique. We were really on the dissection and the dissection in tree. So we didn't explore this, this possibility.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? I have a, I had a question about you talk about the amortized time, and I'm just curious exactly what's your computation model? Is this assuming some kind of parallelism or something?
No, there is no parallelism taken into account. But in this amortized cost, we forget the polynomial factors. So, for example, the code length or the constants in the cost.
I'm just a little bit confused what the amortized. So what do you? I mean, what's the thing that's being done which makes you think about this being amortized? Because you're generating a large list or something?
In that sense. Okay, for example, for the K-tree, we can assume that the lists are generated on the fly. So we only take into account the memory consumption of the first list. And yes, sorry, I'm not really sure to see what you mean, in fact.
Well, normally when you talk about amortized, I mean, to me, the word amortized is something like, because you're doing something in parallel, or you're doing some computation organized in a way that this is somehow improved over just sequentially computing things. I mean, normally you have an algorithm that would, if you ran it in a sequential way, it would have some cost. But by doing something, by doing some bit slicing or some organizing the computation in a way, then you talk about the amortized cost because you're averaging over a different. Does that make sense?
Ah, yes. In fact, I mean, in the amortized cost, I mean that the overall complexity of your algorithm is the number of solutions returned by these algorithms. So when we have constant amortized cost, it means that the overall time cost modulo constants is the total number of return solutions. So I don't think it has something to do with parallelism.
All right, thanks. Okay, we probably should move along unless anyone else has a question. Great, okay, thank you, Charlotte. You can stop sharing. Okay, Andre, you're next.
All right. So, can you see my screen?
Yep, it's all good. You can.
Perfect. All right. Yes, thank you. So this is a joint work with Emanuele Bellini, also from Technology Innovation Institute. So so the NIST PQC standardization effort is approaching the end of the third round, and this third round will end with a selection of schemes to be standardized, which makes it increasingly important to understand the exact security level of proposed parameter sets. Of course, obviously, these parameter sets need to be part of the standard. And in this work, we focus on code-based schemes, of which there are still 3 remaining in the third round. And the goal was to give precise security estimates for the different or the parameter sets of the different schemes under different metrics, where metrics means especially different memory models. And the hardness of code-based schemes is usually relying on the difficulty of the syndrome decoding problem. And this problem, or the best known algorithms to solve these problems, are information set decoding algorithms. And in this work, we basically make 3 contributions. That is, first, we observe relations between all major ISD improvements, which allows us somehow to unify this diverse landscape in a kind of framework, which makes it easy to derive complexity formulas for each of these algorithms. And we provide these frameworks, these complexity formulas, in a publicly available tool called Syndrome Decoding Estimator, which allows to estimate the hardness of arbitrary syndrome decoding instances. And then finally, using this tool, we provide the precise security estimates for the different parameter sets. And in this talk, I will only give a brief spoiler on the security estimates. So if you're interested in the details on the other contributions or details on the security estimates, I refer to our paper online or the longer version of the talk. So let's dive right into the security estimates for the bike scheme. So here we have the 3 categories, 1, 3, and 5 given by NIST, which relate the security of the scheme or the parameter set to the security of breaking AES with respective key lengths. And we find that for bike, basically all given parameter sets match the security categories. And now it's important to note that all algorithmic improvements on ISD, as we've also seen in the talk by Charlotte, are heavily relying on the use of memory. And of course, an algorithm that has a huge demand for memory will certainly slow down the computations because it simply needs to access these amounts of memory, and memory cells are usually quite slow. So in a more accurate or a realistic security estimate, we want to account for this memory usage, meaning we want to penalize the algorithm for a high amount of memory it's using. And for deriving this penalization, we use some established models. I don't want to dive into the details, but of course, if we introduce these memory access costs, then we can only increase the margins, since bike is already matching its security levels. And the same holds basically for the HQC scheme. And this is a result of the specific choice of parameters made in the bike and HQC scheme, which does not allow the ISD algorithms to benefit too much from the made algorithmic improvements, so they cannot leverage the memory to its full extent. Things change a bit if we look into the classic McEliece submission. So here the same categories hold. The only difference is that we have this submission team provides 3 category 5 sets. There is 5A and 5B, meant to provide roughly the same security, and category 5C set to give high security guarantees. And if we do not impose memory access costs, we find that only 2 out of 5 sets match the security guarantee. But to be fair, these algorithms used to obtain these estimates use huge amounts of memory, which makes it increasingly interesting to look into memory access costs. And we find that if we consider low memory access costs, the picture does not change drastically. But under high memory access costs, basically all but the category 3 set match the security guarantees. But so it's a slight outlier of the category 3 set here. So what does this mean for the code-based schemes or the code-based submissions? So as we have seen, the bike and HQC scheme is are already secure under conservative metrics. So if we introduce memory access costs, we can only increase the security margins. But nevertheless, also for the bike and HQC scheme, but especially for the McEliece scheme, we've seen that memory access costs certainly matter. And so our suggestion for the submission teams is to decide for a metric under which the parameters should be proposed, and then ensure that all parameter sets match the security levels equally well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andre. Okay, do we have any questions? Don't see anything in the chat or the Zulip yet. So one of the big challenges for post-quantum crypto is to understand also quantum security levels against a quantum attacker. And you're talking about classical attacks and the kind of the challenge of what is the cost of memory for classical computing. And I think the situation with quantum algorithms is even less clear about what is the cost of quantum storage. But did you think about doing some similar kind of simulation or some kind of tool for estimating quantum security as well?
Yes, so I didn't include it in this talk, but in our paper we also give a rough estimation of the cost of a very basic, so the original ISD algorithm by Prange. So we do a very optimistic analysis of this algorithm, not including a lot of overhead that the real implementation would generate. And we find that all schemes, all parameter sets match the quantum security level given by NIST. So the reason we did not consider algorithmic or more advanced algorithmic improvements was that they usually use quantum memory, and therefore we didn't include those.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that we don't really know enough about how to solve it. Dan Bernstein has put a comment in the Zulip saying that he always explicitly stated the memory access costs. I don't know if Dan, you want to speak at all, or you happy with your comment? I don't know if they have a technological obstruction to speaking. That's all right. Anyone else want to? Oh, hang on. No audio at the moment. Okay. We've achieved the impossible. We've silenced Dan Bernstein, so that's great. Sorry, Dan. No, I love you, really. All right. Is there any other questions? Cool. I think we're getting, we're doing good shape, and I'm very happy that this is a cryptanalysis session, but we haven't actually broken any NIST finalists today, so that's probably good. All right, thanks. You can stop sharing, Andre.
All right.
All right, so Bo, I guess you're next. Cool. Yeah, do you want to start?
Yes, I was trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, so thanks everyone for being here. I know it's late in Europe, and so I'm Bo, Yembo T, and this is joint work with Boris, Peter, and Simon. So Boris is actually on the call. It's 2 a.m. in Rome, so if you have any questions, maybe, yeah, you can try to talk to Boris as well. So our paper is on the isogeny problem with torsion point information. So this is a continuation of the GPST paper. So I'll just give you an overview of what the setting of the paper is like. So there is an algorithm for finding secret isogenies of SIDH type schemes given the endomorphism rings of your starting and your target curves, as well as some torsion point information. So this is kind of our paper in a nutshell. So originally, we know that you can, given the endomorphism ring of the starting and target curves in the SIDH setting, we are able to recover isogenies, or rather the equivalent isogenies, because what we're recovering is actually the connecting ideals. But this only works for SIDH because we take advantage of the fact that SIDH produces short isogenies. So I'll explain to you what it means in the next slide. And we are not using torsion point information. So this is known in 2016. So in this paper, what we do is that we extend this GPST result to B-side type systems. And what we actually show is that the prime P in B-side is tight. So roughly speaking, there's a gap between SIDH and B-side that we bridge in this paper. So SIDH has short isogenies because you have two parties using roughly half of the space that you're given in the isogeny graph, if you like. So short isogenies, we mean that the isogenies have degree roughly equal to square root of P, whereas B-side has longer isogenies. So the techniques that we use in GPST are unable to work with B-side in general, because you only recover short isogenies. So what we want to do is that we want to recover longer isogenies. To do this, we need to use extra information known as the torsion point information. So this is so you start to wonder, why right now you need to use this torsion point information. Is this actually a better attack? And I would say yes, because in B-side, you still need to provide this torsion point information for you to complete the square, if you like. So this is not superfluous information that is unavailable to an adversary. This is actually information that we did not use in GPST. So all B-side and SIDH schemes would provide this information for free to an adversary. So this is still a strong attack. So the idea is to compute an LLL basis for this. So O1 and O2 are the endomorphism rings of your target and your base curve. So I is a connecting ideal, and you want to compute an LLL reduced basis to get this omega 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in GPST, you stop here. This is where you stop, because one of this would allow you to compute the correct isogeny that you use to recover the secret. But this is not sufficient here. So in general, these are not enough, and you go further. And so we're going to have to, what we do is that we need to use the torsion points information, which is given by your phi P and your phi Q. And we need to express phi P and phi Q in terms of linear combinations of omega. So the first thing you need to do is you need to evaluate these isogenies on phi p and q, and this you can do using a technique by Lauter and Petit. And once you have all these information, you will use them and put them in an equation in this following form, solve them using linear algebra, which can be done well with techniques listed in the paper. So I say easy here, but this is kind of the meat of our paper, I guess. So these 3 lines, these 3 points are the meat of the paper, and I'm just giving you an overview. So if you're interested in how this is done, I encourage you to read the paper or maybe look at Peter's longer explanation online. So once you have solved what xi's are, you can then use your knowledge of this phi wi's, which is what we covered over here, to reconstruct your secret phi. Okay, so moving on to the last slide now. Just a recap of what we have done in this paper. We generalized the GPST attack to a larger class of SIDH style schemes, namely B-side. And we provide an algorithm for evaluating, non-smooth degree isogenies. And so this gives us an attack for B-side that's more efficient than mid in the middle. And we actually prove that the current B-side parameters are tight. So that they're not affected. So we can't actually touch them yet, but it cannot be lowered. So this is the end of my presentation. Maybe I'll leave it over here.
Thanks very much, Bo, for that. Are there any questions in the Zulip or in the audience who want to ask a question? Yeah, I mean, it's a nice, I think I like this result because I like the way it, you have to use some quite nice analysis of the lattice, and the fact that the vector of a certain length in the lattice will have these coefficients xi of a certain length, and they're bounded by the size of the torsion subgroup and all that kind of thing. It's nice, some nice little details in the paper.
Yeah, it's interesting how isogenies are so related to lattices. Well, actually, everything's related to lattices.
Well, especially this class group action stuff, right? It's the lattices are very explicitly there.
Yeah, it's a very small lattice, so a lot of the time you can just brute force this sort of stuff, right? When we say LL reduced basis, we're actually talking about the Minkowski reduced basis.
Yeah. So I guess a question would be, when we did the original work on SIDH, I seem to remember there was it was just on the sort of breaking point, and we sort of there was a kind of suggestion that you might have to brute force a couple of bits of the secret isogeny just to get the norm small enough so that LLL definitely outputs the right vector.
Yes.
I don't know if we use the torsion point information, would that actually give a kind of cleaner analysis in that case, do you think?
Well, I do not think.
Because you could actually define a different lattice, right? At the moment, you're starting off with the module between O1 and O2.
Yeah.
And you're starting off with the basis for that module, and then you're imposing the torsion points condition. But you could make these torsion points conditions a restriction on the lattice to give you a lattice of a different volume, and then the behavior of LLL might be different.
But I mean, this would definitely the next few steps. So after GPST, if you continue doing these few steps, you could definitely use this for SIDH. There's nothing stopping. There's nothing. We're not using anything special about B-side to do all these steps. So you could definitely use these, but whether it's better, I have no idea because I never compared the two.
No, it's probably not better. It's probably not actually a project worth anyone spending time on, but you feel like it's probably a kind of a sequence of it. Like if you looked at slightly unbalanced parameters or something, there'd be kind of maybe a unified attack that kind of uses both approaches or something.
Yeah. So we have an example in the paper if you want to go through it, and we do it quite explicitly, even though we take some we cheated a little bit because it's hard to compute endomorphism rings explicitly. So we took some liberties in there which we thought were fair. So you can check
a question in the chat: why does the attack not significantly And Lucas says it's not an attack, it's a reduction. Yes, so first is not an attack, it's reducing the hardest of one problem to the hardest of another. So of course, thank you, Luca, for your comment. But back to the other question in the chat: why does this reduction not how should we say not really apply to B-side? Maybe is another way of saying it.
Yeah, well, first of all, you need to work out the endomorphism mix, right? So that in itself is, I think that in itself is enough of a barrier. But yeah, I think that's the best answer, to be honest.
But also it's about the parameters, right? You really need the parameters to be, you need the M2 to be this big to
yeah, exactly. So you do need some inequalities that I did not show here. It's in Peter's actual longer presentation. So you can see the inequality of M1 over M2, and it needs to be something over 16. I can't remember the exact ratio. But you need the ratios to play
D
nice.
over 16, where D is the length of the smallest isogeny between the two curves.
Thank you. Thank you, Boris. Yeah, D over 16.
Cool. All right. I'm going to make a final call, last call for boarding for Ehsan Ebrahimi. If Ehsan is here, please speak now. Okay, I think the flight is departing without Ehsan aboard. So I think that was 5 talks was all we were going to get. All right.
In fairness, it's pretty late in Luxembourg.
Yeah, there's this happens. Cool. All right. Well, that ends the session. Thanks to all the speakers and to the audience for showing up. If anyone wants to stick around and talk about isogenies afterwards, they're welcome to. Otherwise, we have a 25-minute break approximately.